is the Bearcast, presented by Bird Culture Ford. Bird Culture Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoak and Grayson Grundhoefer.
And welcome in, everybody, to the Bearcast here on SicEm365.com and the Baylor Athletics on SicEm365 YouTube page. On this Tuesday, May the 14th, I'm Craig Smoak, joined as always by Grayson Grundhoefer and Garrett Ross behind the scenes producing. As usual, hopefully you've had a good start to the week, and we are here to hopefully better that. Talk a little bit of basketball, talk a little bit of football, and as usual, all things Baylor Athletics. If you're on the YouTube page live with us on Tuesdays at 11:15 a.m. and you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're joining us after the fact on whatever podcast platform or the YouTube page, same thing. We'd really appreciate that. That's a good way to bump us up and give us a little bit of love in return for being here with you every week. And so any help there would be much appreciated. But if you've already done all those things, thank you. And thanks to everybody just for being here. As usual, we've got a lot to unpack this week. And Grayson, we got some more transfer portal. We got the end of some spring sports, potential ending coming up for one of the spring sports, the official end for another. But here at the end of the semester, people have graduated and started to move on. And man, it's like the transfer portal never dies, as we'll get into. But how you feeling this week, man?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to watch that, right? Because you kind of keep going throughout the weeks and guys are still entering the portal and you're trying to figure out, what's going on. Obviously, graduations play a big role in that. You've seen that with basketball, a little bit with football as well. So things are still, trending in that direction. Obviously, grad transfers can enter whenever they want. But outside of that, it's been an entertaining week, I would say. Football is still trying to figure out their roster. So is basketball and women's basketball, honestly. So a lot to dive into, a lot to talk about, and still some work to do for all of those programs.
Well, let's start off with men's basketball, as they had a couple of big headlines this week. We were fortunate to be joined by Scott Drew yesterday on the show, and he's making the media rounds, had a press conference as well, as just kind of get settled into being at Baylor and having been on the other side of the Kentucky stuff and now having landed some transfers, just checking back in with the media as they go about their business. It was good to talk to him, and also good to see them making some further moves in the portal, as Jaylen Celestine, senior forward, the latest to join this basketball program, formerly of Cal. We'll get into his accolades and his numbers and things like that, I'm sure, but the third transfer portal pickup of this offseason for Scott Drew and the men. Of course, Jeremy Roach from Duke was the initial starting point to their transfer portal activity, and then Norshad Omier from Miami, the big forward from the Hurricanes, and now from the Golden Bears to the just the Bears. It is going to be Jaylen Celestine, the third member of the transfer trio so far. So Scott Drew and company remaining very active, and here's yet another addition. So how does Jaylen Celestine fit in your mind, and what kind of addition is this?
Another really nice pickup for Scott Drew and the staff. I think this is the one that kind of, if you're going to say, okay, who specifically replaces Jalen Bridges or that Jalen Bridges role, it is Celestine. This guy can really shoot the basketball, shot 44% from three last year. He's 6'7", 215 pounds. So again, fits that mold of, a forward type, right? Can play the four, and really gives Baylor some options, I would say, because if you want to play Norshad Omier at the 5, now you can play Celestine at the 4. If you want to play, Josh O at the 5 and then put Norshad Omier at the 4, you can bring Celestine off the bench. And so I think those options that they have for him are going to be really key. But I think in general, having a bigger body who can shoot the basketball at a very high level is a great thing for Baylor. It gives them options. And as we saw, in the 2021 season when they had Matthew Meyer coming off the bench, as we saw in 2022 with Jeremy Sohan off the bench, having a guy like this who's versatile but also gives you some size and some versatility in your lineup is key. And I think that's exactly what Celestine's going to bring to the table. So again, a really nice pickup, and also the area we alluded to last week that they were really trying to fill with the transfer portal, and that's what they did with him. And the other great news with Celestine is he has 2 years of eligibility. So you're looking at a guy that not only has an impact this year, but you're expecting him to be a locked-in starter in 2025 as well.
Yeah, so not just the typical one and done that you can see most of the time, or that you end up seeing most of the time in the transfer portal. I mean, there's a lot of guys that go for multiple years, but I think the attention's normally on the guys who are like the one and done, like sort of super high impactful guys. But yeah, they're expecting a high impact, and yet they can also get more than just a season out of Jaylen Celestine if that's how the cards play. So a double whammy of positives there with this addition. And I know the board was fired up, and people just in general seem fired up about Baylor basketball and the moves they've made thus far. So Celestine, Roach, and Omer, so far the pickups, I mean, where are they even at this point as far as, like, they can't have much room left at this stage with the three that they've gotten. But how's the roster looking now at this point? And knowing that, we got some NBA draft news to talk about as well.
So kind of the way that I've been looking at it, and a lot of this is influenced by what Ashley Hodge has kind of been writing on the board, and just my overall beliefs on it as well. But essentially, I think it's coming down to a few things. I believe the staff wants a backup center, which makes a lot of sense. Someone who can either come in for Josh O, at least provide depth for them, bring a high motor, bring kind of reliability to the position in case Josh O does not take the step that I think the staff believes he will take. And then the other area is kind of, I think, a developmental piece, potentially. Someone to replace the loss of Amiro Little as a developmental type. I think that's possible as well. But I think the focal point right now is finding a backup center, finding someone who you can bring in who is, again, reliable, trustworthy, and really just rounds out the roster and gives you another option as far as a rebounder goes, and just a high-energy guy. I think that's kind of what they're looking for to round out the roster and round out the rotation.
Well, it's been a very busy offseason, incredibly busy, just with the Kentucky stuff, and even prior to that, losing John Jacobs, and then post that, losing Alvin Brooks III, and then just the transfer portal activity, and now you've also got the NBA draft combine ongoing as well. A couple of Bears that are a part of that, so it's been interesting to see just some of the news coming out of there. Nothing substantial in terms of the Baylor guys, but just in general, it's good to have that presence, and it's been something now where every year you can expect to see one or two Bears that are working out with the scouts in attendance and getting to be a part of this combine process. I think it just speaks to a very healthy place they are when it comes to what was a complaint at one point in time, and it was a very minor gripe, but it's one of those things that just gets magnified if you're not winning. So when they were kind of going through a little bit of a slump there for about a year or two, it's like you start to pick apart like what all is going wrong, and one of those things was not going wrong, but one of those things that you said could be better was certainly their impact in the NBA. And man, now it's regularly every summer you're watching guys, get this opportunity to go perform in the combine. So been cool to see, some of the news coming out of there as well.
It really is. And I mean, they've performed pretty well. I think Yves Missi definitely performed the best yesterday. Jacoby didn't shoot the ball particularly well. He was actually outshot by Zach Edey in the three-point shooting, which
wild,
is just kind of a wild side note because we all know how good of a shooter Jacoby Walter is. But I think in general, everything that I've seen so far on mock drafts after the lottery, it's essentially kind of this expectation that Jacoby Walter's probably going to be somewhere between 10 and 16 as far as being picked. And Yves Missi's range is a little bit wider. I think the highest I've seen him is like 13, but then I've seen him as low as 22. So I think both are locked in first-round picks, but we'll see if either land in the lottery. I think they'll at least get one, and I could also see if Yves Missi continues to test this well, and if he performs well during the other drills and things like that, I could see him rising a little bit just because we've seen this kind of shift in the NBA where you really want athletic centers who are rim runners, and that's exactly what he is. So I think he fits that mold pretty well, and Jacoby Walter fits the mold of a shooter. So that's been interesting too. And then don't forget Jalen Bridges as well. He's been mocked as someone who's probably going to get drafted, but likely in the second round.
Yeah, so a trio of guys that are all expected to get picked at some point in time. You never know with second-round picks. It can always get kind of squirrely, that part of the NBA draft. There's not an exact science there. There's a lot of sometimes just straight-up just stupid picks just because it's not the NFL draft. Let's put it that way. Like, your lottery guys are pretty much guarantees, and beyond that, like, the whole thing's just kind of, who knows. But it always is nice to get drafted, and there are 3 Bears that have that opportunity. So there's a little bit of a rundown. Don't have much of a breakdown on like combine numbers and things of that nature, so to speak, in a big picture sense. But it's good to see that there's been some positive feedback on all the guys, and just looking forward to where they end up later on this summer, because that's going to be a big deal, and that'll start pushing this Baylor alum group closer to 10 than it's been in a very, very long time. So just cool to see numbers added there. Meanwhile, not only the addition of Jaylen Celestine and then, some future pros getting work in front of NBA scouts, but also announced as there's a lot of just like stuff being announced in the last couple of days, like lots of fall kickoff times for the Fox broadcast and the ESPN Game Day broadcast, getting some of those early sites announced. Baylor not involved in any of that with their football program in the current shape that it's in. But basketball, too, announcing some of the preseason tournaments and fields and whatnot. And a matter of fact, just this morning, the Maui Invitational announced their 2025 field, and it will include Scott Drew and the Bears as they are going to be joined in Maui by North Carolina State, Oregon, Seton Hall, Texas, UNLV, USC, and Chaminade. So that is the 8-team field for the 2025 Maui Invitational. And so there you go. The Bears joined by the Longhorns, the Ducks, the Running Rebs, the Trojans, among others. And, we're accustomed to seeing them compete in big-time tournaments every year, but sure would be something to see them run into Texas early on in the season, especially now that we don't know when they're going to play each other all that often. So here's an opportunity for that to potentially happen. But not the craziest or sexiest field in the world, but there's a couple of intriguing matchups here.
I've been waiting for this for a long time, for Baylor to go to the Maui Invitational. I mean, this is really cool. This is a tournament that I remember watching as a kid. It's always been so iconic and something really, really cool to start off the college basketball season. And yeah, you look at the the teams that are in it. It's not the most elite group. Baylor is probably the best program of all of them, I would say. And so that is interesting. But I also think you mentioned Texas. If Baylor got to play Texas in the championship game of the Maui Invitational, that would be really, really cool, especially because, of course, Texas will be in the SEC at that point. I think it's a pretty interesting group. But I think in general, just going to the Maui Invitational, competing in that tournament, it's very prestigious and something I know I'll be very intrigued to watch.
Yeah, definitely. So looking forward to that when that gets ready to tip off in Maui. I'm sure that'll be an attractive, event for Baylor fans who love to travel or set up trips and the like. That'll be, I would imagine, one of the more popular destinations that they've gone to, although they've been a lot of different places. But, yeah, Maui's kind of hard to beat anywhere in the world. So that'll be fun. And, yeah, if they were to face Texas early on, that would add a little extra spice to it as well. But I think the best program in that field on paper right now at the moment, but some competitive teams that could make that a lot more interesting outside of just the sights and sounds and scenes of being in Maui for some competition. So cool to see that as well. And that's where we kind of are with basketball at the moment. Just now waiting to see if another domino may drop in the transfer portal with a big, as you mentioned, and now getting some of these game times announced. So there's that when it comes to the hoop side of things. Meanwhile, if you wondered, if you just at this point think that the transfer portal never closes, you wouldn't be exactly right, but it sure does feel that way because, man, it's a year-round just discussion. The transfer portal, the transfer portal, the transfer portal. Teams are in seasons. They're already talking about the transfer portal if their season's not going well. Even if their season's going well, they're looking at other teams, seeing who they can get out of the transfer portal. The portal's open. Everybody's going crazy. The portal's open. Portal closes. People are still going left and right throughout the portal. And we are kind of now in the last gasp of players in the portal. Everybody's pretty much landed somewhere that's, had multiple opportunities or been some of the more desirable players. They've all landed, but there's still players remaining. And as we know, we've talked about, Baylor's been on the hunt to try and find guys to help fill some of their remaining holes. And sure enough, last night, just when it seems like it's getting kind of quiet, another addition out of the transfer portal, which brings us to what? We at like 13 or 14 now at this point, I think.
Yeah, I think a little higher than that, but 5 post-spring is the 5th one.
So the 5th one since the spring ended, and that's just a couple of weeks ago. But South Carolina offensive lineman Sidney Fugar pledges to the Bears last night, committing and choosing Dave Aranda and the Bears over offers from Colorado and UCLA. A guy who's now going to be on his 3rd school, which I've documented multiple times in the last couple months is just the new normal nowadays. Don't know how good that is in the long run, honestly. I guess we'll find out in several years how all that shakes out, but did start off his career where was that? At
Western Illinois.
I had Western Carolina in my head. Western Illinois, then went to South Carolina. That's why I have Carolina in my head. And now he is going to be headed to the Bears, 6'5", 325. Not a perennial starter, but started a few games here and there for the Gamecocks. We know they need help on the offensive line. I mean, at this point, they need bodies, they need depth, but they also need some players that can make a difference as well. I'll be honest, I'm not banking on him coming in and being a difference maker right away. Feel free, agree to disagree, but how do you view this pickup of Sidney Fugar, knowing that, hey, it's a good pickup, congratulations, welcome to the fold, all of that, but how much of an impact are we looking at here, and just what are they kind of seeing as far as what mold he fits and how all that comes together?
So I think the first place we need to start is the fact that Baylor's had 5 official visitors since the spring out of the transfer portal, and all 5 of them have committed to Baylor. That's a big deal. Baylor's done an amazing job when they've got guys on campus. Those guys have committed at 100% over the course of the post-spring. So clearly what they're selling and what they're saying and the trajectory of the program, things like that, it's appealing to prospects as well as potential playing time, of course, especially when we're talking about the offensive line. But, as far as Fugar goes, so this is the 4th offensive lineman Baylor's taken out of the transfer portal. And I think there's a chance they take a 5th guy out of the transfer portal. I think they are dead set on making sure that the offensive line is given the best chance possible to be far better than they were a year ago, because they were dreadful last year. They couldn't block anyone, whether it was in the pass or the run. They're trying to change that up. I think it's pretty telling that Mason Miller comes in and looks at the offensive line all spring and then turns around and adds 2 more offensive linemen out of the portal. It's very clear that that's a position of need and a position that they're clearly trying to address. Now, as far as Fugar goes, I think you look at what he did at South Carolina, and it's not the most encouraging thing ever. His PFF grades were not very good all year long. His offensive grade was 41.2, which is really bad.
He started games at the beginning of the year and then quickly was not starting games.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so he started 2 games at left tackle and really struggled, and actually was better in the second half of the year because he moved to right tackle. And so I expect him to play right tackle at Baylor. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to start at right tackle. I could also see him moving to the interior, as Baylor's looked around for guards as well. I could see that being possible, but I think initially he will be at right tackle. He'll be battling with Campbell Barrington, potentially Caden Siraki as well at that right tackle position. I don't think he's a sure thing to be a starter, but I will say he has SEC experience now. He is a guy that has high upside. He's got great size at 6'5", 325. And he's older. He's been in college for 3 years now. He's a redshirt junior. He's got 2 years of eligibility, so there's some upside in the future years as well. And this was a guy that had offers from multiple schools, including took official visits to Colorado and UCLA. So he's a legit Power 5 type prospect, but is a guy that still does have some question marks, which, to be honest, at this point in the transfer portal, anyone you really take is going to have at least a couple question marks. It's just, is your belief in them that they have a ceiling that you can reach and develop out of them over the course of the next few months? We'll see on that, but Baylor definitely sees some upside here with him.
So congratulations to Sidney Fugar. Hopefully third time's a charm, and this is a spot where you can make the biggest impact possible. But from Western Illinois to South Carolina and now to the Big 12 and the Baylor Bears, welcome on board. And the 14th pledge through the transfer portal for Baylor. I just counted them up while Grayson was talking there. 14 players to the transfer portal, and that seems like a lot, and it's actually not even close to the most in the country. Dion and Colorado, who are now back in the Big 12, they have 40 transfer portal commits. I would lose my mind if I covered Colorado. That is just stupid.
And they don't
that
care.
Amount of transfer commits.
Unapologetic about it either.
Yeah, I mean that's just dumb. Now 8 of them are quote unquote 4 stars, but I just you got to win now. Like, you got to go do what you got to do. But I don't know. Like, that's 2 years in a row where they're basically doing half their team through the transfer portal. I just don't know how well that works out. We'll see. Obviously, this year it didn't work out very well last year, but they've got 40 commits. I really would. If I had to follow that, I don't know. I'd quit the podcast, honestly. I mean, I could not talk about that many transfer commits every week. Louisville's got 30. Arizona State, another Big 12 team, 29 commits, 29 for Indiana. UCF's had 26. Houston's had 26. Now, they've had a coaching change, but still. A&M, 28. They had a coaching change. Washington, coaching change, 27. So some of these are coaching change related. Some of them aren't. But 40, the high water mark. So the Bears not even halfway to having the most, although 14 does seem like an awful lot. So we'll see. That was about what they brought in last year, and it did not make a difference in the long run. Several guys did not work out or got injured or just for whatever reason. So hopefully better luck this time. They're obviously looking at it with a different perspective, and you need to go and fill holes, and they're seemingly doing that, and you're not going to have questions about whether they got enough on the offensive line. It's a matter of how good they'll be. That's the question still, but they have addressed what appeared to be a thin or brittle line as far as numbers and just physicality and things go. Now I think they can feel confident with Mason Miller that they've got some guys in the trenches that they can lean on a little bit more.
Yeah, they definitely have the depth for it, and they definitely have the pieces that I think fit better for what Mason Miller wants to get done and what Jake Spavital wants to get done in this air raid scheme. I do think, like you said, there still are questions about, how productive are all of these guys going to end up being, but I do think these guys do give them a better chance at least having the depth to make it through a season, and if there are injuries, at least you have that depth to potentially sustain good football. Whereas I think before the transfer portal season, you would have said, man, you lose one offensive lineman and this thing's just going to crumble. Right. I don't think they're at that point anymore, and I think they've added guys with quality experience, which was very important this offseason. And again, I'm not sure they're done yet, even on the offensive line.
So how many scholarships remain at this point? Because the guys who transferred out have transferred out at this point, and it would be moronic to jump in the portal now. Quite frankly, I guess there could always be further attrition, but that thing's pretty much dried up at this stage. So what are they looking at with 14 players in and just a couple of months to go until they start getting preparations for the season's underway?
So by my count, I think they have 2 spots left. I think one of those will probably be used for the offensive line. I'm not sure what the other one will be used for. My guess would be kind of a best player available type. I think that would make a lot of sense. But in general, not a lot of room. And you're also talking about what about walk-ons? What about, other situations like that? But in general, my count is at 2, which again means they got to be very selective with these last couple spots as they try to round out this roster. And it's it's so important this offseason because they got to win football games if the staff wants to be here next year.
Yeah.
There's a lot of urgency.
No, there's that message that's out there pretty loud and clear at this point, and they got to show some definitive progress to maintain this thing the way that it has been constructed the last 2 or 3, or I guess 3 or 4 years now at this point. So that's where we are with the latest addition to the transfer portal. So good news there. Meanwhile, I know there was an intriguing offer that you wanted to talk about when it comes to the 2025 class and the quarterback position. Of course, they had their quarterback in was it Adam Schobel, who was committed, and I was trying to remember between him and Nate Bennett. Nate Bennett already on campus, of course, but Adam Schobel was lined up as their next quarterback signee, and then he, like all their quarterback signees that are lined up for months and months at a time, just continues the tradition of decommitting and committing elsewhere. So now he's going to go to Oklahoma State, so that leaves them in a spot without a quarterback, Grayson. So I guess offers of interest going out, or an offer of interest going out there.
This was the first offer for a 2025 quarterback since Adam Schobel decided to flip his commitment to Oklahoma State. If you remember last year, it was kind of around this time where Baylor was kind of pivoting and looking around for quarterback prospects, and they offered a bunch of guys, didn't land any of them, and then things progressed, and then they offered Nate Bennett, and then of course Nate Bennett committed, and he was kind of the guy that they found after that initial wave of prospects they were looking at. Now it's a similar situation, but it didn't take nearly as long. So Coppell quarterback, Edward Griffin, he, again, becomes the first 2025 quarterback offer since Schobel decommitted. And this guy was the unanimous overall District 6A MVP. Coppell went 12-1 this year. He completed 74% of his passes for 3,556 yards, 48 touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions. This is a great offer in my eyes. This is a kid that's really set the world on fire this spring. He's been awesome in 7-on-7. He performed at the Elite 11 Regional, won the accuracy challenge, competed really well there, stood out to a lot of people that were in attendance. 7-on-7 circuit, like I mentioned. Lots of raving reviews about what he's done there. And Coppell's actually going to be in the state tournament at the end of the month, next month, at the end of June. And so he's kind of evaluating a lot of things. So far, the offers are Marshall, UTSA, UTEP, North Texas, McNeese State. I think a big part of that is the fact that TCU already has their quarterback committed. Tech already has their quarterback committed. So those kind of Baylor level programs already have their guy commit in the class. So now Baylor's able to go out, find the next guy on that list, and it's Edward Griffin. And like I said, a really good offer, a guy that's going to have more offers as time progresses, and a guy that's going to look to take an official visit in early June. So he's going to be on campus in a month, maybe less than that. He also told me he might take an unofficial visit before then. So again, lots of interest there. A guy that I do feel like Baylor's in a great position to land as their 2025 quarterback, and a guy that I think fits really well with Jake Spavital's scheme and kind of what they're building towards. And I mean, those numbers speak for themselves. In Texas 6A football, to have a 48-3 touchdown to interception ratio is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, those sound like nice numbers, so good to hear that there's some progress on the pursuit of whoever their quarterback is going to be for the 2025 class. It's been a topsy-turvy position. Maybe that's one where, we see more of them going the transfer route every year. I know that's been discussed, but you still want to grab young guys and develop them, and they've done that with Nate Bennett, and it's important to get a quarterback every year. I mean, that's still one of those things that you want to check off the checklist, barring that you have one of those bizarre seasons where there's like 12 spots, but that's rare. And so if you can, status quo is to sign a quarterback every year, even though it's harder than ever to keep a whole room together, as we've witnessed firsthand these last few years. But that's good. That sounds promising. And so that's something to definitely keep track of and keep up with over on the premium section, as that recruitment will continue on throughout the coming weeks and months. And I think with football news, we got some win totals we'll talk about here in a second, but I think that's about it, right? For right now, is just continuing to attack the portal, picking up players through the portal like Sidney Fugar, and eyeing the next ones on the recruiting trail. So that's where they are. I'm gonna have a piece. It's slower time of year now, but I've got a piece where it's probably gonna come out tomorrow, where I'm just taking a look at all three sides of the ball and just kind of grading my feel. Not like my technical breakdown, but like scale of 10. I feel 8 out of 10 about this position group, and that's kind of how I've gone about doing it. So I'm going to start off with the offense, and I'll have that tomorrow. And it is an interesting exercise to just kind of see where they are and see where expectations are now that the dust has settled. And I don't know that really any of the transfers have changed my mind all that much, but it does make me more confident in just how sturdy they're going to be, as opposed to having some pretty massive holes heading into spring ball, or questions heading into spring ball. there's things to still be answered here and there. But for the most part, I think we have a good idea who this team is at this stage. So we'll start getting into that exercise as I'll drop that piece tomorrow. But how are you just feeling in general about where they are, I guess, before we get into these win totals here?
I think they're in a really good position, and I actually got asked about this yesterday. Offensive line, defense line, where are they compared to last year, and are they closer to Big 12 average than they were a year ago? And I feel really good about the defensive line. I don't know what you're going to put in your piece, but I think the addition of Linus Noel is huge. Like, they really needed someone who is a proven nose tackle, a proven interior defensive lineman. They also went out, got Jaquez Evans as well, who plays that jack position. We know they're going to try to put two jacks on the field more. That makes him really important as well. So I just think their front four, it's far better, far more explosive. Steve Linton, Garmin Randolph, Jaquez Evans off the edge, I think gives them a different level of playmaking and getting after the quarterback. I think all of their young guys and their versatility up front with Jackie Marshall, Trey Wilson, Kyan Roberts-Day, Cooper Lands, I just think there's a lot of talent there. Brendan Bett as well. Just talent, guys that could take a big leap, guys that actually have, potential NFL ceilings. I think that's so important. And so I feel really good about that group. I think in general, though, I still need to see more on the offensive line for me to get, too excited. I think they've shored up the depth part, but I still need to know that the starting five are going to be really good, or going to be good at least. So right now I'd have that group below average. But in general, I think where I'm at is I think the defense has gotten a lot better. I think it's taken big steps in the right direction. I trust what they're going to do on offense. I think Jake Spavital is going to be able to come up with a game plan to score points. And so for that reason, you look at their schedule, you look at the rest of the Big 12, there aren't really elite teams, which tells me that Baylor should have an opportunity to at least be in every single game on their schedule, which I think gives me confidence to say, okay, this could be a bowl team for sure during the 2024 season.
Yeah, I mean, we are definitely not talking about competing for the Big 12 title right now, and they would have to make some more moves, or some just things just have to become far clearer, I think, to feel good about that. But making a bowl game, that's kind of what the barometer is, and that's sort of the unofficial, I guess, marker to reach for Dave Aranda and company to feel good about the direction they're going after missing out on a bowl game last year, and then the awful loss to Air Force the year prior that just really, I think, fast forwarded and really brought us to this place where we've kind of been now the last year and a half. That was such an awful feeling, such an awful end of the season after an awful final month, and it's just like kind of continued from there. And so then to not even make a bowl game last year, like, that's bottom line. Like, you've got to make a bowl game. And like, if you don't, because you finished 5-7 and like half the team got hurt, well, at least there's some nuance there that you can talk about. But in general, like, that's the bottom line, bare minimum expectation, because otherwise you're not making any progress. Like, you are just sitting there, not even making the postseason for 2 years in a row, which is just not, you just can't. They cannot afford to be in that spot right now as a program. And so it's very interesting. This year they head into, as a lot of people are Dave Aranda fans, even people who despise Baylor still want to see Dave Aranda do well. I've heard that from multiple people. But you got to make the bowl game, and where everybody sort of sits on them right now is right on that line, and you see that in the Vegas totals, and sure enough, I think the last ones that we talked about had them at 5.5 wins, and I think that's where they're going to probably be for everybody, because again, that bowl marker is like the line in the season sand, and sure enough, the Big 12 win totals from Action Network HQ, they dropped those today, and there's the Bears, 5.5 wins, so that's the marker for them, and I'm not surprised. That's the intriguing number to have them at, because it's either this thing's going to get turned over because they missed the postseason, or they make the postseason, and then we see what that kind of looks like, but that would obviously be a big step forward. So 5.5 wins for Baylor. Not surprised there, but are you still confident in going over that if you had to place a bet?
I'm not surprised either. I think 5.5 is actually spot on the right number. Man, if I had to place a bet, they need to fill out these last two spots. If they go out and get an impactful offensive lineman, one more that I think is a locked-in starter, then yeah, I would take the over. I think right now I still have them 5-7. I've mentioned this though. If they go out and add a couple guys that I feel like are difference makers with these last two spots, or at least one more spot with the real difference maker, I mean, I could easily, if you look at their schedule, they could easily win 7 games. It's really, I mean, look at all these teams that are bundled up from 7.5 all the way down to 4.5. I mean, they're all just kind of mixed and matched in there. Baylor can win a lot of those games, but right now I think I have them 5-7, 6-6, which makes 5.5 perfect.
It makes the intriguing number. That's why I think everybody's going to use that number. And so far, we've seen pretty much everybody use 5.5 as their win total. But that is their win total according to Action Network HQ. They've got K-State and Utah at 9.5 each. Which no surprise, those are the trendy picks in the preseason. Kansas State lost a good bit. I mean, they're coming back in mass, and Avery Johnson, I know they've added through the portal and whatnot, but you're still losing guys like Ben Sinnott and Cooper Beebe, and those matter. So
Walker Howard is good player. Like
who?
Will Howard,
Will
really
Howard,
good player.
Yeah.
Will Howard is. I mean, he's.
Well, you got Avery Johnson though, so that kind of
I know,
that's
but
a trade-off where you're like, okay, you feel like you're at least replacing him.
But he's still a good player.
No, he's a good player.
And a veteran and has been really good for them. And I know
but he also lost his job by the end of the year.
They split reps. They did. They split reps. I mean, they did.
That was Avery's job by the end of the year. But I get what you're saying. He's a good player. I just don't think that's knocking their win total all that much. But, yes, the point being, as I was starting out, was that they've lost some talent. So I don't know that they're just an automatic 9.5 wins, but they are one of the most often-mentioned favorites in the preseason. Kansas, another very trendy pick as they continue their upward trajectory. They have them at 8.5 wins. Expecting Jaylen Daniels to come back. Jeff Grimes takes over the offense. I saw a really interesting comment about Kansas the other day. I'm intrigued to see if this is true or not. I just came across this random convo and the replies of something that was about like realignment or something, and it might have even been suggested maybe because just you look through Big 12 stuff, Big 12 things get recommended to you, and it was a comment about Kansas, and it was along the lines of talking about Andy Kotelnicki going to Penn State, and I guess there was this conversation about like how much of a blow that was to them or not, and somebody who follows Kansas was like, well, the receivers are sure happy. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, they understand Jeff Grimes. Like, I don't think that the receivers are just going to flourish under him either because they sure as hell didn't the last couple of years here. But I am interested to see what the offense looks like. And clearly Lance Leipold is going to have a huge influence. It's not going to be like Grimes comes in and runs the show. But Kotelnicki was very creative. And I'm just curious of what that offense looks like because just running the ball, they should be great. But I just thought the receivers comment was interesting because I'm like, how much did you watch the last couple of years? Because if there was a concern on offense, it was the passing game and the wide receivers especially were just not really coming along. Now, that might have been youth and all that, fit, whatever. But, I wouldn't go into the season thinking the Kansas wide receivers are just going to explode. Then again, with Jaylen Daniels, maybe they do. So they're intriguing is all I'm getting at, and that's one of the parts of them that's intriguing is the Jeff Grimes aspect.
I think if you're taking a bet on Kansas going over, you're taking a bet on Jaylen Daniels playing all 12 games.
Yeah,
because if he doesn't, I don't think they're getting over this number.
But Jason Bean graduated,
right.
So they're not going to have that luxury.
Yeah, like they were able to overcome it the last 2 years. I do think they're going to be good. I trust Lance Leipold, but I do think that, again, Jaylen Daniels, if he doesn't play, this is a 6-6 team. If Jaylen Daniels does play, could be a 9 or 10 win team. I mean, they have that ceiling for sure.
And then just the log jam in the middle: Arizona, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, TCU, Texas Tech, UCF. All of them listed at 7.5 wins. So everybody just not really sure how to sort out the upper half of the Big 12 beyond Kansas State and Utah, and Kansas, by a nudge, a smidge over the rest of those, which is the extra win total number of 8.5 versus 7.5. West Virginia 6.5, and then you get into Baylor. They're grouped with Cincinnati and Colorado at 5.5. Arizona State, BYU, and Houston round up the bottom at 4.5 each. So anything of interest there? I mean, Houston with the coaching turnover, I think they'll be better off than what that looks like with Willie Fritz. I don't know if they'll make a bowl game in year one, but I do think they're in good hands. I feel confident about that. But yeah, beyond that, anything jump out to you about these win totals?
Yeah, so those 3 teams at the bottom, I think, are clearly going to be the worst 3 teams in the Big 12. Houston's got a tough schedule. They got to go to Oklahoma in the non-conference. I mean, I think that's going to be a little bit too much, and they've lost a lot as well. And BYU and Arizona State, I just don't think they're going to be very good. I could see everything just kind of falling off for BYU. I could see them being like a 3-win or a 2-win team. I think it could get that bad for them. Outside of that, I think West Virginia is the team that, that Vegas, I think, doesn't want to be wrong on. And so you see them put them at 6.5 instead of 7.5, instead of 5.5. They had to put someone a tier lower, and so they put them there. They seem like a pretty good bet, I think, to hit the over on that win total. I don't feel good about these 7.5 win teams all the way through 5.5. I think any of those teams could win 8, maybe 9 games, and I think any of those teams could win 5 games. I just think there's a lot of mix and matching in there. I think that there's a lot of belief in teams that you're kind of just hoping they take a big jump, like a UCF and a Tech as well, making that big leap. So I think it's really interesting just kind of looking at that, but nothing in there really stands out outside of this. There aren't elite teams in the Big 12, and the middle of the conference, a huge chunk of the middle of the conference is very, very even.
Yes, it is. I mean, it's going to be a fun league just from a total crapshoot standpoint. Now, Utah fans feel like they're just going to roll in. They're like Texas fans with the confidence and a little bit of arrogance, like not quite all the way turned up to 10 when you talk about like the loudest of the loud parts of the fan base, but they definitely are rolling in very confident and not really respecting the Big 12 from a lot of what I've seen. I mean, I guess respect for the teams in general, but a pretty large sentiment they're just going to roll in and be the favorites and they're going to dominate in football is kind of what I gather when watching Utah fans online a lot of the time. K-State fans they feel like they're totally back, and why not? Like Chris Kleiman's a great coach, and they're set up really well, so easy to see why those two are considered the favorites just on paper. But yeah, I mean, overall the league's a total wild card in terms of week in and week out what to expect. So it's going to be different with just the team turnover, but it's going to be, I think, a lot of fun this upcoming Big 12 season, although very good chance that they all, eat each other up and don't allow for more than maybe like one playoff participant most years if the formula were to stay the same in a 12-team playoff. So, yeah, we'll see how all that goes. Arizona, I think they're getting a lot of love, and deservedly so, because they've got probably the most star power, or as much as anybody else in the league, as far as like actual names and first-round draft pick types and that type with Fafita, McMillan, amongst some others. So I think they'll be exciting as well. So there you are on some win totals for the Big 12. Meanwhile, spring sports closing on down, and one team's headed to the postseason, another is not. Baylor baseball is not heading to the postseason. 21-29 in regular season play. They have lost 3 in a row, and it's been a bit of a rough go as of late for the Baylor Bears. Swept by Oklahoma last week. They had gotten the win over Tarleton at home last Tuesday, 11-4, but then proceed to get beat 19-7, 9-1, and then 19-7 in 7 innings. So absolutely obliterated up in Norman, Oklahoma by the number 17 Sooners. They were scheduled to take on TCU in a one-off midweek game later on tonight in Fort Worth, but that has been canceled due to the health and well-being of student athletes. I believe I saw where a TCU baseball player, I believe, like a mother died or something along those lines. Maybe that's what I hesitate to say, but I believe that may play hand in hand here. But the game was canceled. Point being, and so now that leaves them with just a weekend series to go, and that is UCF out at Baylor Ballpark starting on Thursday and then rolling through Friday and Saturday. And here's what we know. They are not going to the Big 12 tournament. After the results of last weekend, they were right there on the cusp of it. Last time we talked, they were riding that line, and that line's now become clear, and they are standing behind that line. So they are not heading to the conference tourney, and so this UCF series will bring the season to a close. And it's been rough. It's been up and down. It's not ended well, although they have an opportunity to end it on a higher note this weekend. But there were some promising turns at times here in this season, and yet here we are with 3 games to go, 21-29 and 9-18 in conference play. So not what you want to see, not what you were hoping for. But how are you feeling about Mitch Thompson and baseball and just sort of where they found themselves now?
Not good. I mean, just simply put, they're 3-11 in their last 14 games to close out the season. Just completely threw away any opportunity at making the Big 12 tournament with this latest run. Their RPI is 128th in the nation. This is just in general, this is a terrible baseball team. 1-19 versus top 50 teams. Jeez. I don't know how that is possible in baseball. You get lucky every once in a while in baseball and win a couple games. They're 1-19 versus the top 50 and enrolls top 50 UCF. So I don't know that this is going to get any better. I think they're probably going to lose this series. They might even get swept against UCF. And I mean, just in general, it's really disappointing. They have not performed against top-level teams. They've really only gotten their wins against the teams outside the top 50. I mean, they have all 20 of their wins are against teams outside the top 50 in the country. So it's been a really disappointing one, and one that I think kind of got away from them. And so we'll see. I'm not very confident in where they're at right now. They're going to get guys back from injuries that they had this year, and maybe that'll make all the difference. But right now, it's really tough to see a clear path, to success, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to be heading into year 3. We're obviously big Mitch Thompson fans, want them to do well. But, yeah, you kind of just wonder, what direction are they going? I know there's been investment, and there's, a lot of great coverage by our very own Levi, as he's followed them all season long and had great write-ups and whatnot. But, yeah, it's just been very frustrating here the last couple of weeks in particular, as you kind of just see the writing on the wall, and then sort of petering out as the season gets into the nitty-gritty and need to win games, doing the complete opposite, and to the point of finding themselves not even participating in the conference tournament, which certainly is at least like it's like Dave Aranda, got to make a bowl game. You got to make the conference tournament. If you're not making the conference tournament, then that's not just having a bad season. That's not even reaching a certain even part of the success ladder there. So, we'll see what that looks like moving forward, but obviously disappointing news for Baylor baseball wrapping up the season that way. I have a question before I get into softball. Do you have as many freeze-ups when you're on the Baylor Athletics website as I do?
Yes. I had to go look at D1.
So it's not just me?
No, I go to D1 baseball now.
It is maddening. I don't know what the deal is with the official athletics website, but it is the only site I go to that automatically freezes up my computer. Or just takes forever to load pages.
It doesn't load. Yeah, that's my problem.
I mean, I don't know. It's and I don't have the ad blocker on. I've tried that. It worked, and they've clearly pennies are getting taken away here. Let's disable anybody using ad blocker and just junk it up even more. So I don't know. Whoever runs these websites, you got to do better, man. I try to just look at schedules and my whole computer shuts down. And I got a Mac, so that doesn't happen all that often, frankly. So it's just not me. It's not just me. I feel better about that. But yeah, I'll go to the official Big 12 website, I guess, and take a look at softball as they are now headed to the NCAA regionals. Their regular season came to a close, of course, and then last weekend the Big 12 tournament. They managed to win one game in the Big 12 tourney, defeating UCF 3-2. But then there's two big dogs in this conference, and fortunately they're not going to be in the conference any longer. This is the last time you'll ever see them. Unfortunately for the Big 12, it's the two best teams arguably in all of college softball that are now no longer going to be a part of your league. So there is that trade-off, but Texas has been number one for quite a while. Oklahoma actually ends up winning this thing when all is said and done, beating Texas in the finale. But after a win over UCF, Texas takes out the Bears 14-3, run rules them in Oklahoma City to send them home packing. And then they turned around and got word of where their season would go from there, and it will be going to Lafayette, Louisiana, coming up here at the end of the week, and it will be the Ole Miss Rebels in the NCAA regionals for Baylor softball. So they are into the postseason and taking on a team out of the SEC to try and extend their season. So we'll see how that goes for them. But, didn't have grand hopes for the Big 12 tournament, just given the dominance of an Oklahoma and Texas. You knew you were running into them in the second round, Texas that is, most likely. And sure enough, you do, and we saw how that went. But any thoughts on softball as they get ready to gear up for the postseason here?
I mean, I know we only talk about Texas and Oklahoma, but let's also not – Oklahoma State is a top 5 team in the country.
They're good.
I mean, they're really good. They're hosting a regional. They're one of the, top 5 teams in the country. They're a really good program as well. And Baylor's 1-9 against the top 3 teams in the Big 12. So if you want to know why their record is what it is, 1-9 against 3 teams is a huge problem. But in general, I mean, this is where it's at. Baylor has the number 5 strength of schedule in the country. Their RPI is 18th. I mean, this is pretty squarely a top 25 team. They're 5-13 against the top 25, which has been the area that they've really struggled this year. But to put in perspective, the team hosting the regional, Louisiana, their RPI is at 11, and Baylor beat them earlier this year in a series. They won 2 out of 3 against Louisiana. Louisiana is 6-13 versus the top 25. So again, great opportunity for Baylor to potentially get out of this regional and get to the super regional. But first up is Ole Miss. Ole Miss is pretty good. Their RPI is 44. They're 7-17 versus the top 25, 2-4 versus the team's 26-50. So a good team, not a great team, and Baylor in general is 12-5 against teams that are outside the top 25. So again, Baylor should be able to take care of business there, and Baylor has beaten Louisiana this year. So, I mean, going into this, I think Baylor's got a great opportunity here to make it to a super regional, and I think that's something this program really does need as well. I don't see them going any further than that, but they need some more success in the tournament. It's been a little while.
Yes, it has. So there you go. Ole Miss and Baylor in the regional round of the NCAA softball postseason. So that gets underway here on Friday down in Lafayette, Louisiana. So there you go. There's a little bit of a roundup of where things sit right now, and that'll take us on into the mailbag and some of your questions from the past few days. And we'll start off with Scotty B., who loves to reminisce. What gutsy sports performance do you remember the most? For me, it is back when Baylor men's tennis freshman Devin Badenhorst found out that his dad and oldest sister died in a car accident back home in South Africa hours before Baylor men's tennis played San Diego in the first round of the NCAA tournament, and he decided to play the match because it's what his dad and sister wanted him to do. Well, Scotty, I'm not going to have anything close to that as an answer, but that is certainly a gutsy sports performance or safe to say, it certainly is, and that's definitely a. I don't know. I don't even know how to respond to that. I don't have anything in mind that comes close to that.
He posted about it on the board, and it definitely is a crazy story and a very unfortunate one, but obviously really cool that he was able to battle through that.
Yeah, no doubt about that. You have any example here?
No, none that are going to match that, right? Because everything that we think about really is just about, a flu game or, something
right,
like that.
Yeah.
I can't think of as many that are as tragic, as this, especially so close to when the game is, about to happen as well.
Yes, it is. So, there's a pretty profound one right there. And Scotty B., we appreciate you as always. While I'm taking a glance, though, at the mailbag, I did see something on the sidebar that I forgot to bring up, and I don't know if you have much of a comment on it or not. I hear NIL, and I just want to bash my head against the wall. It's important. It's necessary. It's a valid part of what we cover nowadays, although just like getting into the discussion about it, I just don't find all that interesting. That's just me. But there was an interesting move made by Baylor Athletics this week of promoting David Kay to their GM, basically, of NIL, and announcing that officially this week that he would be, taking his administration experience and basically applying it to the NIL landscape now. And they're making these changes, obviously, to just better that department. And I know there was another who was the woman as well that was named to the team here.
I don't see it in the.
I don't see it in the press release.
Yeah.
So I'll look for that. But anyways, you get the point of what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on that? Does that seem substantial to you as all that they're kind of forming this wing of their NIL, or I guess it's just taking shape more in the promotion or however you would refer to it as of David Kay here?
Haneen Rashwan is the key executive role that is going to be in this. So, yes.
Director
Rashwan
of NIL Administration,
yeah.
Haneen Rashwan. Couldn't find that in the article and eventually found it. So
right.
There you go. Her and as well as David Kay, the two focal points here in this story.
Correct. And David Kay, obviously, someone that we've built a relationship with just because he's been so involved with Baylor athletics as, an SID and just, really being awesome in that role. So I'm very just curious to see how he does here, curious to see how he transitions into this role. I think he'll be really good for the Baylor program, though, in general. It took them a while to get to this point where I feel like everyone felt confident that NIL was organized and ready to compete with schools going forward. I don't think Baylor, it's not that I don't think, Baylor wasn't on the side of let's be flashy, let's talk about NIL a lot, let's make it a focal point. And unfortunately, I think that did set back, the Baylor football program, as Dave Aranda has mentioned. And so I think this shift over the last year has been really, really important to providing kind of a good foundation for Baylor in this space going forward. And it's something that's going to continue to be very important as things progress, because things are going to change yearly. I mean, things change daily, honestly, with all this, and things are going to continue to change. So to have a staff that is really, focused on this, I think is going to provide huge dividends.
Yeah, so glad that caught my eye because I had that written down earlier, and it's of note in this landscape nowadays. Don't want to shine too much light on administration talk, honestly, unless it's like your athletic director and things like that, like the behind-the-scenes stuff. I know that nowadays with every hobby, like there's more interest in that stuff, like the macro level, than there ever has been before. But that is substantial because NIL is such a big player nowadays. So good to see them further getting their ducks in a row. All right, ZT Smith, 423. Do you believe we're done with the transfer portal for football? If not, what position would you be interested in adding? I think you kind of outlined that offensive line would be a spot that they're still looking at here.
Right. I don't think they're done yet. They don't have many spots left, but I don't think they're done yet. Offensive line is an area I would look at. If you're going to take a best available type with maybe one more spot or whatnot, I think safety, wide receiver, linebacker, maybe an interior defensive lineman would make some sense. Especially a younger guy, someone that you feel like has a high upside. I think that would make some sense as well. But in general, the offensive line continues to be a huge focal point.
BU grad 21 with a little momentum going for football via the portal. Would you attribute the success to staff changes, NIL changes, or recruiting strategy, or maybe a combination of those?
NIL is the biggest part of this. I mean, they had to make changes, and they did, and it's clearly impacted them recruiting-wise. They've gotten a lot better in that area. I think that goes hand in hand with recruiting strategy as far as, how do you attack the transfer portal? How many transfer portal prospects do you feel like you need to bring in on any given year? Obviously, this year and last year, the feeling was they needed to take quite a few. The year before that, they didn't really address it at all. And so I think you've seen the changes being made, and I think that's really led to them having, success, more success than they have in past years through the transfer portal.
Wyatt Smith, out of everyone left in the portal, who would you like to see us get? How many spots are left for both football and men's basketball?
So I think football and basketball both have 2 spots. As far as basketball goes, I saw BYU big man Noah Waterman. He entered the portal. He was actually a really good player. I don't think Baylor's going to get someone of that caliber just because they've used a lot of kind of their resources on, the guys that they've gotten already. So I think he'll probably be a lower level guy. I know, you could look at maybe, Wright State. Big man AJ Braun, he'd make some sense. I think a defensive big or a high motor big would make some sense as well. Just in general, it's just literally a depth big man is kind of what they want to back up Josh O and also just provide a little bit more rebounding, a little bit more energy off the bench. Football-wise, 2 spots, like I said, Bryce Foster at Texas A&M would be my top guy that I would like to see Baylor add. He's going to visit Kansas this week, and I think Kansas feels like they're in a good position to land him. If Baylor can get him on a visit, though, with the success they've had on official visits, that would be key. Liberty offense lineman Chase Mitchell is also kind of on my radar as well. I believe he visited Maryland maybe a week ago, but he hasn't scheduled anything either. So those are 2 guys I'm looking at, with Foster kind of being the top guy.
Do you believe that we have a chance of getting a 5-star player this year if we make a bowl game?
It's so tough to know, kind of where guys are going to end up in the shuffle. But I do think they will have an opportunity to land a 5-star, maybe like a Kamaran Morgan or something along those lines. If you could get someone like that, maybe a guy that's been, very interested in your program for a long time, I could see that. But I don't think you got to keep the staff around, right? So you'd have to make a bowl game for that to happen. So, yeah, it's possible.
61-58 for life. I'd like to hear from both of you guys on this one. If you had to create an all-Baylor fantasy team from the last 30 years of Baylor football, who would be your head coach, your coordinators, your quarterback, running back, and 2 wide receivers, and what year of the Baylor defense?
Okay, this is pretty quick for me. Art Browse is the head coach and offense coordinator. Dave Rand is the defense coordinator. RG3's quarterback. Lake Seastrunk's the running back. Corey Coleman and Denzel Mims are your receivers, and I'm taking the 2021 defense.
Give me Art Browse as OC. Give me Phil Snow as DC. Give me RG3. Give me... Running backs are, I'd feel good about Shock Linwood back there.
Yeah. Or
Abram Smith, yeah. I think Lakes, he's the most explosive, so that's probably the fun one. Give me Corey and Antoine Goodley, and give me, 2021 Baylor defense. I think that would be I think that team could win some ball games. Yeah. That little group right there. So, that's what I would go with. So, 61-58 for life. I think first time seeing you in the mailbag. Appreciate the question. You also asked, what current BU player who started last year will have the smallest impact on this year's team? I don't really see the smallest impact type of a question, so that's interesting phrasing there. But who would have the smallest impact?
It's a good question. So someone that's basically going to get passed up potentially on the depth chart. I don't know that he had the biggest impact, but I truly think that if you look back to last year, Dominic Richardson was the starting running back for this team. I think Richard Reese is going to get back to being the starting running back, and that doesn't mean Dom won't have a role, but I don't know that he's going to be the lead running back like he was last year. I kind of anticipate Richard Reese will take that role.
Yeah, Jake Spavital, that offense ran more than it threw it. I think we have this idea that they just are like a throwing offense. They're opening it up, and like you really look at it, like they ran the ball more than they threw the ball, and it was pretty significant. So I think you're definitely going to see a lot of anybody in that running back room. They're 5 deep, and they're like you can't really afford injuries. If you get 1, you're still okay. You get 2, you're getting into dangerous territory potentially. But I do think they're going to run the ball and be mindful of that. Now, it's just a lot of it's going to come down to the offensive line. But yeah, I could see where maybe some guys are getting lesser carries than the way we saw it divvied up a season ago. So 61-58 for life. Appreciate the questions. Hopefully that answered them in what you were looking for, and hopefully hear from you again. Bears 224, the new O-line transfer Fugar seems to have pretty low PFF grades in his last season. However, he had multiple P5 offers, ended up at Baylor. What's his upside? Is he considered an upgrade or a depth piece? Thanks, and sick him.
He's considered a competitive option at tackle. And so that's where it is. Upside is kind of, you see the 6'5", 325-pound frame, good athleticism, a guy that just needs to work on the technique part of football. And if he can get to that point, I think they feel like he could be a really good tackle for them for this year and for next year. So I'm not going to say that he's considered an upgrade, but I mean, an upgrade as far as a locked-in starter, but I do think he's considered a guy that's going to come in, be in their top 8, and potentially win the right tackle job.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely at minimum depth. I guess it'll depend on what he's able to come in and do in workouts and how much of an impact he can make. That'll determine his ceiling, but certainly depth piece, upgrade, that'll be on him to show that, but I don't think they view it that way necessarily.
He's definitely an upgrade depth-wise. Right, it's just matter, I think the question is asking, is he an upgrade at right tackle immediately? And I think people forget that there were times where Campbell Barrington did play well. There were other times where he didn't. Same with Caden Siraki. So there is competition there. But yeah, I think Fugar is going to come in and provide us something a little different with his size.
Best week ever. Were you expecting a little bit more attrition on the roster? What are your thoughts on why we didn't see more?
I was expecting maybe a little bit more, but not a lot more. And I know there were other people on the board that were pushing, 13 more guys need to go off this roster. And I'm just like,
from where?
From where? Like, you can see guys that you could convince yourself, they don't really need him this year, and that's fine. But I don't think that was ever realistic that they were going to lose that many. I think they did a pretty good job getting to the numbers that they needed to. As far as why didn't we see more, I think it's also important to remember, you go into the transfer portal and you're going to have to use NIL. You have guys on your roster, and a lot of those guys are just at, the base level of NIL. And so you got to be able to divvy around your resources wisely. And so I think it's important to note that, just because it might make sense to lose more guys, it's also you have to fill those guys with transfers and fill those guys with guys that you view as upgrades. And I don't think you're always going to find upgrades in the portal. And so sometimes you want to keep your guys, develop those guys. So I think it's a good idea to keep some. I do think they could have, maybe lost a few more, but I think in general they did a pretty good job.
Let's see here. I just don't know where you could really afford to lose more people at this point without just having your depth depleted. I mean, you're kind of already hanging on as is, just hoping the guys you have are going to be good enough, much less trying to replace those guys with other question marks. You know what I mean? So, you could probably shave a position or two there, but I don't know where you're getting 10 more scholarships from, because so many of these young guys, we haven't seen whether they're worth their scholarship or not. You kind of carved out all the old guys at this point, and some of the, I don't want to call them dead weight, but some of the guys who have been around for a while, they just were not performing up to a level. So at this point, I think you're dealing with unknown and then a little bit of known and seasoning that you kind of have to have some veteran guys. Yeah. So I just don't even know where that would come from to that number. I could see a handful more, but 10's a lot. That's a lot of guys that you're carving up off the roster. I'm a little bit surprised, but 14 new faces is not nothing. I know it's nothing compared to that list I ran down earlier, but I don't think we want to see 40 new people on this roster. I don't think that's doing anybody any good. And if Dion can pull that off, or any of the other examples of those who've taken 30 people, then more power to them, and maybe that becomes more common. But that just seems like a lot of turnover. Overrated. Can you rank the current head coaches at Baylor? Power rank the current head coaches at Baylor.
All right.
I love these questions. We have to need a pen and paper to write down
the ones that I have ranked, I don't know. I'm probably missing a sport or two, but I think Felicia Mulkey is clearly number one. I mean, she's won every single year, basically. That acro program is crazy. Scott Drew's number two.
I'd say number one, actually, but that's fine. I get it with Felicia Mulkey, yeah.
It's accomplishments versus which sport's tougher to win. Right. I think they're both right there, right? You could say 1A, 1B. I'm cool with Scott Drew being number one. I think it's important to also give credit to how many national championships Felicia Mulkey has. The next group is really interesting. I think it's Mike McGraw, the golf coach, but Dave Aranda is also right there, with a 12-2 best football season of all time in Baylor history. So I kind of have those two right there. Jay Goebel is right after that for me. So those three are kind of in a tier. Then you get to Nikki Collin, in my eyes, who had to come in and off of, one of the best coaches in Baylor history. She had to come in, and she's made 2 Sweet 16s already. Clearly, there's, I think, some optimism with that program. People are excited about that program. So I have her there. And then I have Joey Scrivano and Glenn Moore, which I think people might not like that, but I would also say I think both of those need to win currently. They won a lot, but a lot of that was 10 years ago. And now I think it's about winning where you're at and winning right now. And I think they've kind of tailed off a little bit. But and then the last ones are Michael Woodson, who has done good with tennis, but they haven't had a ton of postseason success yet. And then last is Mitch Thompson.
Do you have Mike McGraw in there?
Yeah, Mike McGraw was basically tied for third.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, just making sure. I was just going through the list here. Who'd you have at the rounding it up?
Mitch Thompson. Oh, I'm missing
Michael Ford.
Yeah, Michael Ford.
That's what I'm talking about.
There's so many.
There's so many coaches. It's hard to just go let me sort in my head the 16 head coaches that we're talking about here in order. That's what I was goofing on, or not goofing, but just was commenting on because it's hard to keep up because,
And Ryan McGuire is right around
Ryan
Jay
McGuire's,
Goble.
he's got to be up towards the top, you would think. I mean, just in terms of they've been pretty good, pretty solid, have had a couple deep runs. Certainly Texas has really been a barrier, like in most non-revenue sports, where they can afford to be like operating like a revenue sport, whereas everybody else is a little bit behind the 8 ball compared to them. But I mean they've had some good moments as well. So I think you got the basic gist of it. But it's an interesting exercise to kind of see where everybody falls, and certainly there will be some who have much different opinions and maybe have somebody much higher because of something they did, although they don't view it as being that long ago, whereas you view it like, hey, if it's been like 10 years, then
that kind of does matter. I would also say trajectory of the program. So if you wanted to tell me Dave Aranda should be lower because people are nervous about where the program's heading, I can also see that as well. But his success was more recent, whether people want to admit that or not. It wasn't that long ago. Whereas some of this is like Final Four in 2011. And that's, that's 13 years ago. That's a big deal.
Yeah, no, it is. So overrated. Appreciate the question. It's an interesting question. I just need some utensils to make sure that I can spend some time on that to get it fully sorted out. But I mean, I think you got the gist. I think most people will be on board with that loose kind of summary there, and do appreciate the outside the box exercise there. Bearcats, what percentage would you give us to have a huge bounce back season in football and crack the top 12 to make the playoffs? 10%.
Wow, that's high. 10%.
That's really not. 10% is not very high at all.
To make the top 12. Whew.
Bro, it's barely above zero. It's like I go 5%.
I was going to have it at 5% maybe. And that might even be high. I think that's a lot to ask, especially with how we know the SEC bias is going to be. And so it's basically going to be, you have to win the Big 12 championship, or you got to basically go 10-2 or 11-1. And I don't see Baylor doing that.
No, absolutely not. No way. I mean,
5%,
I could say zero, if that would make people feel better, but there is a better than zero chance. It's just not much better than zero. I mean, let's be realistic here. They are looking at maybe making a bowl game. So to think that there's any type of a playoff run upcoming is I want what you're having. I mean, honestly, and if they were to do that, then it would be one of the greatest turnarounds in sports history. I mean, really, if you were to go from just sort of where they are and the way it feels right now to in the playoff, that would be something. And it'd be great. We could stop talking about hot seats and the murky futures, and we could actually just see some growth and some building on that's going to be sustainable. But the odds of that are very, very low.
It's pretty crazy that in 2021's offseason, their win total was 5.5 as well after the 2020 season. So there is a little bit of, I guess, precedent to that, but I also think that season just happened to be very magical and everything came together, and I think that would fit into the 5% that we're talking about, right? Yeah. Where there's a chance, sure, if everything goes right, and if you win every close game you can, then but I don't see it as being super realistic.
No, it's not. So, we're just being realistic with that answer there. Not looking good, but Big 12, that's doable if things fall the right way. And, hey, if you do that, then you should have a spot in the playoffs. It could happen, but just not expecting it to happen. That's the thing there. All right, so that'll wrap up the mailbag. Appreciate everybody's questions. Some good ones in there, some ones that I'll have to give some extra thought, like off air, like the coaching one. Like that is something I'll just be sitting around later on at some point, sitting there sorting through in my head, and maybe I'll have a fully confirmed list one of these few shows, especially as we get into the summer months to actually go over a proper ranking there. But I do appreciate everybody's time spent listening and also time spent sending us questions whenever you do that. Grayson, anything before we get on out of here?
No, just be sure to check out the premium side of things. We got all kinds of football, basketball, recruiting content, and of course 365 Sports Radio on YouTube as well.
Yes, past 41,000 viewers. I think as last time we were talking, I was asking to help us get over 40, and now we're over 41,000. So moving on up and doing pretty well here as of late, and definitely appreciate those of you who subscribed here recently or Just as you continually do, hit that thumbs up button whenever you watch one of our shows on YouTube, whether it's here on the Baylor Athletics on Sikkim 365 page or over on 365 Sports in the afternoons. All of that is much encouraged, and we are very thankful for. Thanks to Garrett Ross behind the scenes, as always, and thanks to Grayson Grundhoefer. That's going to do it for us. Until next time, next Tuesday at 11:15, this has been the Bearcast on Sikkim365.com.